history.
People who smell like fish curry, and gentlemen. This will be a response to No Reference Rants' generalized and emotionally charged video on the recent events in Ferguson, Missouri involving Michael Brown and the police officer who shot him, Darren Wilson. This video will not be about the innocence or guilt of either of those parties, but will focus on several other issues which will render No Reference Rants with no credibility. He already has no integrity or intelligence. He will now have no credibility. One point I would like to make is No Reference Rants, as you all know, has a lot of free time. Over the past 5 years, he spent a good chunk of his life logged into YouTube, and since I started refuting him, he's logged into YouTube virtually 24/7, frantically trying to undo the damage I've done to his reputation. Due to this inordinate amount of free time and loads of Medicare subsidies, No Reference Rants picks up and laps up anything the antique media vomits forth. He's not a maverick of any sort. He's a low-information voter that needs to read a book or two, or at least quit copying talking points off of Media Matters, Think Progress, and Rachel Maddow. No Reference Rants is obsessed with this sideshow in Ferguson because the antique media is obsessed with it. He's simply a regurgitator. If they weren't talking about it, neither would he. No Reference Rants engages in poor logic, generalization, and again misses the big picture because he's obsessed with doing a video on every big event. They say idle hands are the devil's workshop, and this guy's idle most of the time, unless you count sitting at the computer waiting for a breaking story as doing something productive. I've seen more productive cockroaches on the bathroom floor of a truck stop in Arkansas. Getting to my first point, as it was with the Zimmerman trial, why is this one event such a big deal? Violent events and murder happen every single day. Why this one? I already answered that. The antique media is all over it, so No Reference Rants plays the role of the great regurgitator, as I've covered in previous videos on numerous occasions. Violent crime and homicide have been declining for a quarter century in the USA. I'm not saying it's all roses, but those stats are irrefutable. One of No Reference Rants' goofier statements is the following.
Cops don't get to kill suspects unless they're armed and shooting at them.
I understand what No Reference Rants is saying, but a suspect doesn't have to be armed to do a lot of damage. If this dumbass had a modicum of intelligence, he'd know more people get killed with personal weapons, i.e. pushing someone down a flight of stairs or punching them in the face until they kill them, than are killed by rifles and shotguns in these United States. One doesn't need a firearm to inflict severe or fatal damage on another human being. If a police officer, and some officers are fat slobs, while I've seen others, usually ex-Marines who can handle themselves quite well, if a police officer comes up against an unarmed suspect who is exhibiting violent behavior, and the officer believes he is physically outmatched, he has every right to shoot that suspect if he feels the suspect could overpower him and kill him, or take his firearm and kill him. If the suspect makes continued attempts to make physical contact with the officer in a violent manner, he's likely to get shot in that case. No Reference Rants has no idea what he's talking about, and his point makes zero sense. If someone breaks into my house, they don't have to be armed. They will be killed. No Reference Rants, and that goes, most gun owners would agree with that. No Reference Rants then attempts to dub Ferguson, Missouri as America's toilet for this one event, and as you'll soon see, it has a lot of competition. Brownie is correct if he's asserting the St. Louis metro area, which Ferguson is a part of, is one of the most dangerous metro areas in these United States. Later, I'll go over some homicide data in detail. St. Louis alone is one of America's most dangerous cities. However, Ferguson, if it is indeed America's toilet, has a lot of competition. Why not dub Chicago America's toilet because of these events? Back in August, there were a rash of shootings across Chicago, America's toilet, that left 3 people dead and others severely injured. Let's just call Chicago America's toilet because of that. How about it? Does that sound good? Chicago isn't as dangerous as St. Louis, but it's putting up a good fight in one of Chicago's suburbs, as you'll see. It's putting up a good fight, as you'll soon see. Some of Chicago's suburbs are even more dangerous. Gary, Indiana is one of them. Quote, a horrific machete attack by an illegal alien gang on 2 innocent young men waiting on a platform for a Chicago L train has been caught on surveillance camera and is making big news in America's toilet, Chicago. Chicago is, of course, a sanctuary city for illegal alien scum under the policies of dumb old crap Mayor Rahm Emanuel. WGN reports that the Border Patrol had been called in to investigate the immigration status of the assailants, finding that nearly all of them are here illegally. Surprise, surprise. And probably all dreamers eligible for amnesty under Hussein's DACA executive order. 3 of the illegal alien scum are suspected of belonging to the brutal MS-13 gang, well known for using machetes against rivals. End quote. As you can see, these weren't Bible-toting white guys from Paducah with itchy trigger fingers. Is Chicago America's toilet? You decide, but it has a lot of competition. How about Detroit? It would be a front-runner for any toilet award for a lot of reasons. Let's just pick a few for now. Farmington Hills is a suburb of Detroit, so this may not be totally germane, but since Ferguson is a suburb of St. Louis, I'm going to let it slide. Quote, the 43-year-old man accused of killing a 59-year-old Farmington Hills party store owner has been convicted on all charges. Cassell Nettles was found guilty of first-degree felony murder, armed robbery, and various weapons charges in the 2013 death of a Farmington Hills party store owner. Nettles is due back in court for sentencing October 20th. I didn't find out, end quote. I didn't find out what happened, how long this puke got sentenced. But why no big media circus over a black man murdering another man for no good reason? Why isn't the antique media camped out on the streets of Detroit and Chicago reporting all the black on black crime and all the black men murdering folks? Doesn't that make for good television? I think we can call Detroit America's toilet just for that event, aside from the fact that it's one of the leaders in homicides per 100,000. My father, while he worked for a large multinational corporation the last 11 and a half years of his working life before he retired, knew a man who grew up in Detroit, and he said, if the neighbors don't get you, the rats will. How about Indianapolis? Can we call Indianapolis America's toilet? This from 2007. Quote, jurors convicted Demetrick Shepherd, 22, he's not a white guy, of rape and murder Wednesday night after deliberating for about 4 hours. He lowered his head and remained silent as the verdict was read. Shepherd's victim, Chelsea Porter, 14 years old, was found dead in an apartment in late June. She had been stabbed to death. Authorities said Shepherd entered the apartment while she was sleeping to steal some car keys when she awoke, and then he attacked her, stabbing her 11 times with a butcher knife. Why no antique media outrage over a young black man murdering a little girl because he wanted to steal a car? Why no endless protests? Why no constant coverage? I guess that doesn't make good television, does it? Maybe there just wasn't enough welfare to be passed around. That's it. We're not spending enough on education or welfare. So is Indianapolis America's toilet? You decide. How about Granada Hills, California? Could it be America's toilet? Back in 2012, there was a quadruple homicide there. According to the LAPD, the victims were visiting friends at the residence when they were confronted and shot by the suspects, who then fled to Las Vegas. The suspects were taken into custody at the Silverton Casino. Those 4 folks didn't deserve that end. That was a heinous crime, and I have to ask, why no protests over the murder of 4 individuals? I guess that doesn't make good television, right? I guess that isn't good enough for antique media photo ops and pop cultural grandstanding. But just for the heck of it, I'm going to dub Granada Hills, California, America's toilet. Someone please flush, and if you do, you get a free bottle of Listerine, although there are several other cities in California in contention. Granada Hills has some stiff competition. Although New York City is rather safe as far as big cities go, there was a rash of shootings back in August, and in an 8-hour period, 15 people were shot and 2 were dead. Also, considering that Alan Grayson was born there, that's more than enough evidence to nominate New York City as America's toilet. How about Portland? Can we nominate Portland, Oregon as America's toilet? This story will make your blood literally boil. Quote, an illegal immigrant protected by Hussein's Amnesty for Dreamers, brought to the U.S. through no fault of her own as a child, will not be deported after being convicted of a felony hit and run for killing 2 little girls playing in a leaf pile. The shocking story comes out of a small town near Portland, Oregon, a city that has long offered illegal aliens sanctuary. In fact, the entire state of Oregon is a sanctuary for those in the country illegally, and all law enforcement officers are banned from using any public resources to locate or capture illegal immigrants. This case involves a 19-year-old woman, Cynthia Garcia Cisneros, living illegally in the U.S. since she was 4. She's a classic candidate for the President's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals DACA directive, which grants illegal aliens who come to the U.S. as youngsters a 2-year deferment from deportation. End quote. Here's the skinny. Everyone involved in this case, including the prosecutors, believe that this illegal alien scumbag did not intend to kill these children. What started out as a playful stunt ended the lives of 2 children. However, this dung heap, this piece of garbage, then hid the vehicle, and her and a few friends went out later in a different car. The boyfriend washed it the next day, trying to erase evidence, but suspicious neighbors notified the police, and Cynthia was caught. So does Portland, Oregon, and Oregon as a whole, do their sanctuary policies deserve the coveted America's Toilet Award? Why no outrage over a dreamer trying to evade the consequences after accidentally killing 2 children? Why no public grandstanding? Why no constant media harping about illegal aliens? I guess that doesn't make good television, does it? I'll bet if it was a high-ranking member of some Tea Party organization, by God, it would find its way to the television set somehow, and No Reference Rant would do 10 videos on it. His teleprompter would probably overheat. So is Portland, Oregon, America's toilet? Underneath the video, I have a few more links as I provide references, and No Reference Rants doesn't because he's copying off kook blogs. By the way, he learned the word kook from me. There are a few more stories that curiously avoided antique media detection. Black mobs in Memphis, which may be a candidate for America's toilet as well. Black mobs in Memphis creating havoc and beating people up. How about the fatal shooting of a white 32-year-old police officer, Daryl Pearson of the Rochester, New York Police Department on September the 3rd by a black man. I'm going to assume Thomas Johnson III is innocent until proven guilty, but why no mobs in Rochester, New York? Why no looting and property crime? Why no endless antique media reports from the streets of Rochester? Doesn't that make for good television? No grandstanding by Jesse Jackson, no photo ops and FaceTime for race traders like Al Sharpton. Where's the outrage at that? No Reference Rants. Oh, that's right. The antique media didn't say anything about it, so you didn't even know about it. It wasn't on your kook blog roll, eh, Brownie? What about a black police officer in Salt Lake City, Utah, shooting and killing a 20-year-old man named Dylan Taylor back on August the 11th? Apparently, Mr. Taylor was unarmed. The video of this is available on the internet. I'm not going to link to it here. Find it yourself. Why no antique media grandstanding? Why no constant, perpetual coverage of that event? I guess if the good people of Salt Lake don't create enough chaos, it won't make the news? They didn't burn down enough businesses and break enough windows? They probably haven't rioted enough, but I guess in this instance, which was captured on the officer's camera, isn't newsworthy. Our next piece of business will pertain to numerous homicide statistics for various cities in these United States. And while St. Louis is a crime-ridden cesspool, it has a lot of competition. I hate to belabor the point, but it's true. I'll also urge everyone to utilize some census data and take a gander at the ethnic makeup of some of these cities. Crime-ridden cesspools like Baltimore, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Camden, New Jersey, which alone deserves an award for moral depravity, Gary, Indiana, Stockton, California, etc. You'll also notice I've included a lot of state data. It's usually correct that the highly populated areas are the worst ones in a state, But that's not true all the time, especially considering New Mexico and Arizona. Their metro areas are safer than the rural areas. Georgia is a pretty safe place when one considers homicide statistics, so long as you're not in Atlanta. Atlanta may get the coveted America's Toilet Award, no offense to my friends in Atlanta. Believe it or not, but outside of America's toilets, otherwise known as Flint and Detroit, Michigan, Michigan is a pretty safe place, but those two cities are heavyweights when it comes to homicide. Our nation's capital, which is also a hotbed for STDs and corruption, does a fine job of pulling our national homicide rate up. Outside Chicago and its metro area, Illinois is relatively safe. Well, at least it's not a war zone, I'll put it that way. As you'll see if you peruse this data carefully and avoid political correctness, as well as realizing that government social engineering is a failure, you'll see the most crime-ridden areas are in the ghetto, where the welfare state's failures are easily seen. Fatherless children having children and not caring for them. In areas with high concentrations of poor black people, often you have a high crime problem. Truth hurts, doesn't it? Many of these cities, such as Flint, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Ohio, Birmingham, Alabama, Nolens, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Gary, Indiana, are losing population. Buffalo, New York's another one. Yet crime continues to skyrocket. Nobody wants to live there, and I don't blame them. I've elucidated this factoid many times, much to the chagrin of those who play the race card on a regular basis. From 1980 to 2008, blacks were about 13% of the population, yet they were perpetrators of homicide more than half the time. Since the late 1980s and early 1990s, the homicide rate in these United States has cratered, even along ethnic lines, yet the most common form of homicide in these United States remains a black person murdering another black person. This isn't politically correct and it isn't popular, but it must be said as we stand up to the politically correct race traders who only copy from the antique media and purposely ignore society's decay in favor of emotionally charged diatribes blaming others so they can recuse themselves from responsibility. Our last piece of business will focus on No Reference Rants' comments on the Pentagon 1033 program, although he didn't identify it as such because he was copying from kook blogs that don't know either, but are adept at passing around generalized talking points. He attempts to blame George W. Bush for this, yet the program and its predecessor, the 1208 program, didn't know that, did you, Brownie? Began in 1997. That's why I call him No Reference Rants, but don't count on the uneducated, unemployed idiots frequenting his channel to call him out on it. They'll believe anything that comes out of his pie hole. Let's correct the old man with the facts.
Like most things wrong with America today, you can blame the violence in Ferguson on George W. Bush. The military equipment used by police in Ferguson came directly from the Pentagon, something which has become fairly common now that the Iraq War, which George Bush foolishly started, is over. And they have a stockpile of military weaponry nobody's using. The militarization of America's police ever since the Iraq and Afghanistan wars is not a coincidence. And Congressman Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia, is working on a bill to demilitarize America's local police. Leave it to the Democrats to actually do something about government overreach.
Here's the most important part of the 1997 legislation, Brownie, signed by Bill Clinton and passed by a Republican Congress. Almost one-half of Democrats voted in favor of it. I should also mention most of the items being funneled to local police via the 1033 program, as you already saw probably from the screenshots. Not that No Reference Rants knew anything about it. Most of the items are goods such as computers, clothing, etc. Very little, in fact only 5% of it, pertains to weapons and armored vehicles. Quote, Section 1208 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal years 1990 and 1991 Public Law 101-189 is repealed. Section 1005 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1991, Public Law 101-510, dummy, is amended by striking out Section 1208 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal years 1990 and 1991 and Section 372 and inserted in lieu thereof Sections 372 and 2576A. End quote. Section 2576A, which I have screenshots of and have referenced, unlike Old Fart Rants, who copies unreferenced rants off of Think Progress, is the most important section. I'll also mention not much was changed, as this program was known as the 1208 program prior to 1997, dumbass. But it did make specific mention of using the 1033 program to assist local law enforcement with counter-terrorism operations instead of just the war on drugs, and that's why all these armored MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, are being passed out. California, I have links to all this, you can peruse it at your leisure, there's tons of data. California, which is run by Democrats, has 41 of these. Ohio has 36. I guess you can't trust your own politicians, huh? There are a lot of counties in these United States getting these when they don't need them. Why does North Dakota have 2? They don't need them. I don't think North Dakota's a hotbed for terrorism. I don't think so. Now let's go to the 1990 legislation. Huh? Hey, dummy. 1990, George W. Bush wasn't in office, passed overwhelmingly by Democrat Congress, and signed by President George Herbert Walker Bush. Quote, notwithstanding any other provision of law and subject to subsection B, the Secretary of Defense may transfer to federal and state agencies personal property of the Department of Defense, including small arms and ammunition, that the Secretary determines is A, suitable for use by such agencies in counter-drug activities, and B, access to the needs of the Department of Defense, dummy. 2, personal property transferred under this section may be transferred without cost to the recipient agency. 3, the Secretary shall carry out this section in consultation with the Attorney General and the Director of National Drug Control Policy. In the war on drugs, by the way. Then it goes, end quote, then it goes on to list the conditions for transfer. As you can see, because I referenced my stuff, the wheels were already greased for this crap almost 25 years ago. The 1033 program, which replaced it, was going strong long before W became president, so I have no idea what Old Fart Rants is talking about, and I doubt he does either, because he fails to cite his non-sources and copies off obscure blogs. These blogs he copies off of, ironically, don't reference their material either. One would think, with all this free time he has sitting at the computer day and night, he might be a bit smarter. Perhaps he's lost his bearings. Lastly, he mentions Hank Johnson. Senile Hank Johnson, but fails to cite his source there, too. So one is left to wonder what he's talking about. Again, he copies generalized screeds off the internet and runs with it. Actually, Justin Amish and Alan Grayson tried to kill the 1033 program back in June, but to no avail. So Old Fart Rants is a couple months behind, despite having nothing better to do than make dumb, generalized videos and whine on YouTube 24/7. All my sources, which there are plenty of, are cited below the video. Don't thank me now for the history lesson, no reference rants. I own you, buddy.